Welcome back to movementprofessional.com. So this is the next episode in the series, It Hurts When I Do This. So today's a pretty important one because I see this a lot. So this one is, it hurts in the shoulder, typically in the front or the top of the shoulder when going overhead or out to the side. We're going to combine the two because they have similar factors that we're going to discuss. So when we have that type of pain, there's three things that I think of that I want to make sure I'm kind of checking the box on and assessing before I do anything else. The number one thing is I want to understand this area between the shoulder blades, which I'll call the interscapular space, but some people refer to it as a dorsal rostral area, or just think of it as it's the kind of upper and mid thoracic spine right between the shoulder blades. So I want to control this space, and what that means is I don't want it to close down when I'm raising my arm overhead. All right, so when you raise your arm overhead, how far back your hand goes behind your body is not going to be a useful cue for your range of motion for what we're trying to accomplish, especially when there's pain. So in many ways, we're going to not want to see the hand go back as far, but we're instead going to want to focus right on this midpoint of the space between the shoulder blades, or the interscapular space. So we want to basically think of our shoulder blades as two doors that we're trying to keep open, or we don't want them to get closer together as the arm goes overhead. And basically what that does is it helps us dissociate the action of the shoulder blade from the action of the humerus or the arm bone, which means that we basically just want this to stay as is and then have the arm bone move around that. If the shoulder blades come together, then the motion that we're actually getting from the shoulder isn't really coming from the shoulder, it's coming from a combination of the shoulder and the scapula and the rib cage. And at first glance, that doesn't seem to be a problem, but when there's pain, what we often have to do is start to restore motion more specifically at the ball and socket of the shoulder, so we have to really control this space. So I'll show you how to do that with a couple exercises, but the main way to understand this is we won't really want to give it feedback. So if we lie on our back, this area touches the ground, so that gives us a little bit of feedback to feel our shoulder blade squeezing into that. We can use a wall. We want to have some type of feedback to really feel that when the shoulder blades start to squeeze. And then with the way that we're moving the arm, instead of just thinking about bringing it overhead or back behind us, we want to think of it a lot of times as an elongation. My whole arm is tractioning while the space between the shoulder blades stays open. All right, and that's going to be if we're doing it bilaterally, both arms going overhead, or unilaterally, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about lateralization. So concept number one is control this interscapular space. Concept number two, which is connected, would be to control the midline, or another way to think about it is we want to work things that are below the shoulder. And so when we think about going overhead or out to the side, we don't want to think of it as a shoulder movement per se. We want to think, how can we control our middle, which could be thought of as your core or your abdomen, your abdominals, and also your hips. So if I reach my arm overhead and my whole body goes with it, well, I'm not really, again, just moving from the shoulder, I'm moving from my spine, I'm moving from a bunch of other places. So I want to understand my core position, or I want to maintain my core position. So I'm going to control the abdomen. So oftentimes when I go overhead, I'll just think about keeping a little bit of a tension in the belly, or I'll think about keeping my rib position here somewhat parallel to my belt position. And then also we can think about the pelvic position staying as is. So again, a wall or a ground becomes very helpful there to give you this reference for where's the back of your head at, where's the space between the shoulder blade, and where's the back of your belt at. If those 3 points stay pretty much the same as you're moving your arm overhead, now you know we're starting to dissociate more motion from the shoulder. And again, that's going to be important when there's pain because we want to have a little bit more control of our motion from the shoulder. And a lot of times what happens is we think we're moving the shoulder, we're moving from all over the place, and that just starts to create more compressions in the body than we're looking for, and then eventually that leads to overuse and pain. All right, so that's going to be concept number two, is that we really want to control the middle or control the areas below. So we might feel muscle contractions under the armpit in the areas of the lat dorsi or the serratus anterior, the abs, and then glutes, hamstrings. All of those things can work to help us have a focus away from the front and top of the shoulder. And then the last thing is, especially when we're moving with more unilateral or one side at a time, overhead motion, which is the typical complaint that I see. I rarely see bilateral or both sides shoulder pain hurting equally. It's usually one side hurts more than the other for different reasons. So we want to learn to lateralize. And what that means is that if I raise my right arm overhead, I'm not really thinking about keeping my body exactly symmetrical. I might want to bias myself to one side throughout the whole body to get the arm to more easily go overhead. And there are differences that you tend to see versus the right side and the left side, but just for the sake of this conversation, when we have this understanding of controlling the midline and as well as controlling the interscapular region, this left side, if we were going to go overhead on the left, we can think about bringing this left side of the interscapular region more back or posterior compared to the right, and that would in effect turn us a little bit more to the left, which actually gives us a little bit more of a boost or an assistance head start to the left. So oftentimes that takes a little bit of stress out of the shoulder if we're going over here, especially if there's a limitation in range of motion where it feels like I can't go as far, it hurts before I would get to a normal range of motion. Thinking about being able to bring this left side back, and that could be left side at the interscapular region and often at the pelvis or like the left back of the belt coming back. So we'll go over some exercises of how to think about that with the left side and the right side. Sometimes on the right side specifically, as the arm's going overhead, if it hurts, but it hurts typically farther than an end range of motion, we still might have to think about getting the body a little bit to the other side, because stabilizing on the other side allows us to move through a range of motion without overcompensating and moving too much into one side. So lateralization is a concept that might be a little bit hard to describe here. I've done some other videos that go over it more specifically with hip shifting, but that can be really important when we're thinking about shoulder pain on one side with going overhead. All right, so we'll start with the first exercise. Is just going to be thinking about using a post here. We'll use this post like the wall, and we're just going to move actively with the arms, and we'll do this bilaterally. So we're going to feel the back of the head touch the post. We're going to feel that space between the shoulder blades, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a pelvic tilt because that puts the back of my belt or the base of the sacrum right on this pillar. Okay, so I want to have those 3 points of contact, and then I'm going to create this sense of reaching both arms forward without bringing my body away from that pillar. Okay, from there, just reaching up, keeping all those points of contact, reaching up, and as soon as I feel I lose any of those points of contact, that's as far as I can go. So we'll say right there is my end point. You see it's nowhere near as far as I would go if I just took my arm and brought it back, but now I'm actually working on muscles and concepts in a way that's going to be safer for the shoulder, but it's actually going to give me more true range of motion on the shoulder over time. So when I hit a barrier, what I can focus on here is taking an inhale, trying to fill up the space between the shoulder blades, fill up my lungs, maybe reach a little bit more. Exhale, now I'm going to start to engage more of that core control. So abs, maybe I'll dig my heels in and get a little hamstring there. All right, and then I'll inhale, reach a little bit more, try to fill up the lungs, try to breathe into my lower back. Basically, I'm trying to breathe into the pillar more. And then when I exhale, I'm maintaining that sense of reach, but now I'm getting more abs, I'm getting more reach, and I'm getting more tilt, some type of hip extension, which would be a pelvic tilt motion in the hamstrings. So I want to take a couple breaths to try to enhance that. And a lot of times you'll be able to go a bit farther with less pain, but it might not feel, again, as much as you would normally do functionally. But the idea is to bring the concept of controlling the interscapular region, controlling your posture with this reaching, and still being able to build that shoulder range of motion, because that's going to give you more of a balanced movement of the arm overhead, which oftentimes will reduce the pain. If we wanted to use the same exercise but lateralize it a little bit, what we could focus on, so let's just say I want my left arm to be the one to go overhead more. I'm going to just move myself over to the right. So I'm going to focus on feeling heavier in the left side of the belt, left side or less space between the shoulder blades, so the space that's between my spine and shoulder blade on the left. I'm going to reach both arms forward, but I'm going to give myself a little bit more reach on the right. So it's basically steering me to the left. I'm going to keep this reach on the right and just move the left overhead. So now I feel that left side of the shoulder blade, or the left interscapular space really opening up, and I'm going to get to a point where I have to stop. So instead of feeling this in the front of the shoulder, I feel this right in the space between the shoulder blades. And then I'm going to use my exhale, find my left abs, find my left heel, and just do a couple breaths, similar to what I did with both sides, but I now just lateralize myself to that left side. And I can do the same thing on the right if it became a right-sided problem. So as a therapist, I would assess one side versus the other and see if the lateralization cueing was valuable on one side versus the other. Sometimes I might have somebody, again, hold the left-sided lateralization, but have them move the right, because there's times where that reduces the pain for different reasons. We don't have to go into that, but just understanding the concepts of lateralization becomes really important in reducing pain. And then another way that we can look at working this would be on the ground with a heavy kettlebell here. So now I have the ground as my reference for the back of my head, space between the shoulder blades, and then the back of the belt for the pelvis. And then I'm just going to take the kettlebell here, and I want it to be heavy because I just want it to be an anchor. I'm not trying to lift it. And then I'm going to move myself a little bit away. So again, with both arms, I'm fixing myself into an overhead position, but instead of trying to move my arms into the ground, I'm creating a little bit of a hang, kind of a pseudo hang position, and then I'm creating that pelvic tilt. And I'm going to breathe into the interscapular region. Exhale, find the core, the midline, find the hips, and do a couple breaths through there. If this feels like too much range of motion or there's pain there, you can elevate the kettlebell up higher, but just it's helpful to have an anchor as you're doing this movement. If I want to make this lateralize one side at a time, I'm just going to hold on with one arm. I'm going to reach my right arm. I'm going to feel the left side of the body heavier into the ground. So pelvic tilt with a little bit more of the left back of the belt. My right knee will be a little higher than the left, pulling back through my left heel. And then I want to breathe in a manner where I feel the left side of my interscapular region open up or move into the ground. And then the exhale, more left abs, more left heel. And try to do that for a couple breaths. It should not hurt while I'm doing the exercise. So again, if the starting position hurts, you have to just make it a little bit easier. Come out of the range of motion a little bit, and then over time try to gain some range of motion back with the same concepts. Hopefully that makes sense. That could be a complicated topic, but it's an important one. I see this type of shoulder pain all the time in the clinic, and these concepts really do help. So if you have any questions, go to movementprofessional.com. I'd be happy to get back to you. See you next time.